Sorry, we're running a little bit behind. It's going to be just me tonight. Jason actually is celebrating the new arrival of little baby girl Naomi. I will be showing pictures after we finish what we're going to be doing live on Facebook. Um, when you're part of the family, you get to see the pictures. So yeah, we're going to be showing some pictures, but he's, obviously home, supporting the wife and, hugging his little baby girl. So we're going to move on, faithfully without him this evening, with full understanding that he knows that we are sending him all the love that we have for him. That being said, if you could, please share in the comment section below something you did this week for your wellness, something that gave you prana. I actually today started Zandra Wagner's talk on the Sabbath, Sabbath as resistance, or rest as resistance. One of them. It's really good. So I would really encourage participation in that program. It's every Thursday at 1 p.m. It's like a counseling session. It's fantastic. You got Donna, you got all the people that are just lovely people at the Church of the Brethren. They're providing their insights on how they stay as amazing as they are. So I would encourage you guys to attend that program, and then share anything that you might have learned about the history of your racism in your community. Today, we're going to be going into part 2 on our 4-part program. So I'm going to be talking particularly about land and housing, because I think this connects a lot of the racist piece. And then after I, go through this talk, we'll have some action items and then break up into our breakout rooms, do like we do, and then have a good night. All right. Any questions, comments, or concerns? Anything anybody want to share? Any great news? Actually, let me get some shout outs. Shout out to, so many people, and I should have written this down, but I got into Anti-Racist. That book is fire. Oh my gosh, it's just a phenomenal book. That and The Miseducation of the Negro, those have my attention. But Sarah, Tanner, Forrest, thank you for the work you put in the diverse San Gabriel Valley site. Stacy, Professor Baird, thank you so much for all that you're doing with making connections, with helping out with social media. Michelle, I could thank you all day long. You and Dusty, Jojo, you guys are a fantastic group of folks. Our Jenna, absolutely Jenna, got to remember to thank you. Church of the Brethren people, you guys are awesome foundation of support and love. We love you. Thank you. And all the folks out there who are volunteering their time, who are posting, who are speaking up, who have things going, people who've offered advice. I saw Fred. I saw you dancing earlier. You looking good today. Your hair done, girl. You was going. So yeah, good to see you guys. Thank you. I tried to give a brief update yesterday of a bunch of stuff we have going, but I didn't have much time. But there's a lot of stuff going, and it's all because of the attention that you guys are putting on the work that's being done by the various folks in this group. So thank you. Any questions or anything before we get started? I can't actually, no? Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. We're going to be talking about land. There's 2 structural motivations for racist land policy, and that is profit, and 2, maintaining a white-dominated society. And the second one, when people talk about a white-dominated society and creating a white society, this is one of the things that I think is probably the most challenging part. Is it sounds so conspiracy theory, right? Like you have a bunch of white people in a room thinking and contriving and trying to figure out how to keep society white. Like, that doesn't even sound believable. But I actually found a bit of this is Race and Races is actually on Race and the Law. And this is actually an excerpt from a speech that was made at the California Constitutional Convention regarding savage Indians and Blacks, and whether or not they'll have the right to vote. It was evident from the start of the convention that the Negro was not wanted in the new territory. At all events, it was agreed overwhelmingly that those Negroes already in the territory should not vote. The Indian was already in the state, but he should not be either a citizen or a voter. The delegates at Monterey in 1849 remained firm in their convictions that no persons other than whites should play any part in the governing of the state, and proceeded to disenfranchise many of those individuals who had originally cast their ballots in the special election that put these very same delegates in their convention seats. Even an amendment that proposed to grant the right to vote to those Indians who had been citizens of Mexico and were taxed as owners of real estate and expressly accepted all Negroes was defeated by a vote of 22 to 21. And that is when we're talking, that is the California Constitution Convention of 1849. And as you know, that California became a state in 1850. So when you're thinking about how do you create a white society, we realize that a lot of that has come through land and housing policy. Okay, so we're going to be talking about these on two different levels: the profit level, and then the maintaining a white dominated society level. So in the context of profit, there are four major systems of profit that we're going to talk about as it applies to property, but there are many other systems. But there's slavery, sharecropping, convict leasing, and incarceration. Slavery, we know slavery, but it originally didn't start out as a race issue. In fact, the first slave was brought, I believe, by the Dutch, and they arrived in the Newfoundland. They got him, they treated him as an indentured servant. He worked the same amount of time as an indentured servant would. And then after he was done, he got everything an indentured servant would get: a piece of land, a gun, and I believe a small amount of money. And then to start his own thing. And it wasn't until they started to realize that in order to compete, they had to expand their crops and they needed more labor. And the only way that they were going to get that labor was by bringing in more indentured servants. However, because they were having to give up land and give up resources to indentured servants, and the supply of indentured servants was so low, they ended up making a rule that in order to be a slave, you either were, one, not Christian, or two, foreign, i.e. African. And so that's how they started the triangular trade across the Atlantic, where you had folks from Europe take supplies to Africa. They drop those supplies off, they'll pick up slaves, they'll bring the slaves over to the Americas, drop the slaves off and pick up supplies, and then take those supplies back to Europe. And so that was basically how the slave trade ended up working once they realized that using a race-based system of slavery was going to create a much more profitable opportunity. And so, and that's also the unique thing. This was kind of on my mind on 4th of July, because we had a lot of people who are, upset with America, right? And they say, I don't want to celebrate the 4th of July. Well, I guess the alternative would be being a British colony, right? And so that means that we're probably going to be no different than Jamaica, Panama, some of the other cities or other states in the Caribbean that still had slavery, that still had everything that America had. So there's not really much of a difference. And maybe because we're a white dominated society, we'd be closer to Canada than what we have in the Caribbean. either way, I still don't see America looking that different under British or European rule than it does under American rule, considering the Spanish did the same exact things to the Native Americans as the colonizers did to the Native Americans here and the Africans. So understand that the system of slavery started completely as an economic system, and it was meant to be completely economic, and it became race once it became harder to enslave other white people or to meet the demand of slavery or the need for supply with only Europeans. Okay, so that's how we ended up getting from a indentured servant situation to a slavery situation. And the difference between an indentured servant and a slave really is an indentured servant at the end of it goes, at the end of their time, they're done. They usually get a piece of land. They go about their life. Slaves are considered chattel property. And once you were considered a slave, if you had a child, that child was also considered chattel property, which is something that is unique to slavery that is different from indentured servants. If an indentured servant had a child, they weren't necessarily an indentured servant. And so we ended up moving from the system of slavery into the system of convict leasing. And basically, convict leasing is just the same as slavery. A person is arrested and then they're leased out to a corporation or a plantation owner, right? They do the same work. The plantation owner is responsible for feeding them, taking care of them, doing everything. The only difference is if it's your slave, you want to keep your slave alive, right? Because slaves reproduce. Okay. So if you have a slave and that slave has 10 children, you get to keep all 10 slaves. So your slaves are basically growing themselves. In this system, you didn't get to keep the slave. Okay. And you didn't get to keep their offspring. And so what that meant was there's no longer a profit motive to keeping slaves alive. All right. Or convicts alive. So you have people literally get treated like slaves and killed and treated worse than slaves because there's no reason to care about keeping these people alive and there's no consequence for them dying. You just got sent another one. So we actually ended up getting rid of slavery for a system that a lot of people consider almost worse just because of that profit motive to keep slaves alive. At least made it where you wanted live slaves. Here, a dead convict doesn't really matter to you. Okay, and just understand that many of these institutions did not apply just to Black individuals. They also apply to poor white individuals, and so did convict leasing. Obviously, a vast majority of the labor used under the convict leasing system was Black, but there were white individuals as well. And the reason why a system like this statistic was startling, there's almost a 400% return on investment from convict leasing, meaning if a state used $1 billion to hold this program, that program would bring back $4 billion, okay? And that's what justifies having a system like this. You had some states, I believe it was like Alabama, whose state revenue was like 78% based on the convict leasing program. So our economy is really contingent on systems like slavery, convict leasing. We're going to talk about sharecropping and then ultimately incarceration. Sharecropping is basically almost all of these are basically the same system. The only difference between sharecropping and the other ones is the landowner isn't living there with you. Okay, so they give you the plot of land. They say you go take care of this land, and we want 12 bushels of corn and $1,000. Okay, and your crop might be 14 or 15 bushels of corn, and you might get $1,200 if that. So they're taking much of what it is that you're growing at these crops. And so what ended up being found out is many of the people who were sharecroppers were actually going into debt, right? They were filing bankruptcy, and then once they file bankruptcy, the owner takes the land, somebody else comes in, they just switches them with somebody else. So the system continues. It's violent. I actually read a quote that said, If you were white, then, you know, the hooded or unhooded leaders of the city, elected officials or not, would come looking for you and they'll take care of you. If you were black, they just hunted you down, right? So you didn't make trouble if you were poor. You went along with the sharecropper system. And so it was very violent and exploitative, and that's why it ended up ending around the 50s. Okay, and then all of those systems were kind of weeded out, and then we had this massive explosion of incarceration in the 1970s, really after Nixon's war on drugs started. And this is basically the penal labor system, where the 13th Amendment, many of you have seen the documentary. If you haven't, please do so. There's that exception that allows for people who are in prison to be made into slaves. It's legal. And so we saw in the 70s literally a balloon of people be in prison, where I believe we went from a few 100,000 to 2.2 million in a couple decades. And so even though we have 5% of the world's population, we have more than 25% of the world's prisoners. We have more than China, Russia, all of them. And it has a lot to do with this penal labor system. And so it's really about turning a profit. How do you get a profit from, how do you turn the largest profit while giving out the least? And what we find is incarceration has replaced a lot of those previous systems, those previous economic systems that allowed us to draw profits from land. And so this is kind of the structure. So when we start to unpackage, well, why did slavery happen? Why are we living in the society that we are? Well, a lot of the goods that we have, a lot of the economics, a lot of the wealth that this country has literally is predicated on the existence of a subclass of labor. Okay, and that's not even the subclass or, you know, low class you know, labor force, but we need something even cheaper than that. And that's what slavery, convict leasing, sharecropping, and incarceration has served to provide for this system. If you guys have any questions or anything, then feel free to jump in. Are you looking? Can you see if somebody has questions? All right. So the second thing is, how do we create a white dominated society? All right. You do this by creating physical separation. If you're reading Anti-Racist, Kendi talks about it's much easier to get people to get us to blame people than it is to blame policy. Okay, so keeping us separate has a lot to do with being able to perpetuate the stereotypes and the beliefs that we have that keep our system in place as it is. And I'm sorry, my slideshow is so boring. There were supposed to be animations that apparently didn't get saved in my crossover to my other computer. But this is what we're going to be talking about: segregation, redlining, racially restrictive covenants, city planning, and block busting, and white flight. Segregation, as you're probably aware, the U.S. had its own system of apartheid, okay, and that was called Jim Crow. It required whites and non-whites have separate access and use of different facilities, and it basically institutionalized economic, educational, and social disadvantages for African Americans, particularly African Americans, because it came from the South. And in the South at this time, you have Black people and white people in this little race relation here. That was after slavery was outlawed in 1865. Jim Crow took over, and it maintained in place. I didn't create it, but somebody created. I keep saying we. I'm so bad at that. Some racist individual somewhere back in history created a racially restrictive covenant. And these became popular in 1926 after the Supreme Court upheld them, right? So these are very interesting things. A restrictive covenant is basically, so the way a housing development works, if you're not aware, I may be a developer, okay? There's a huge plot of land right here. Maybe it's 100 acres. okay, and I want to take this 100 acres and I want to create a neighborhood out of it. So I'll put together a plan, I'll put together the schematics, I may bring in engineers, I may do an environment impact survey, you know, do all my land analysis, and then I put together a proposal for a development, and then I get funding for that development. I use that funding to create the development, and then I pay back the loan, and then I make a boatload of money from the transaction. Okay. Normally what happens is, in order to keep that development a sound economic opportunity or investment, you put restrictions in it that keep it looking a particular way, right? You're not going to erect any high buildings. You're not going to allow, or you're going to have so much public space. You can't, have your yard in disrepair, whatever the restriction is. What happened in this time, they put in there that you cannot have Negroes or non-whites, depending on where you were, purchasing property. Okay. And so that literally made it where certain developments were off limits 100% completely to minority individuals. And then they were disallowed. This actually got really funny to me. This is literally how the law works. Okay. This is why we get paid the big bucks to be lawyers. You had somebody challenge this law, go all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court say, you know what? Yeah, this is racist. You can't stop Black people or minorities from buying property. And so they said, okay, we will not stop them from buying property. We would just stop them from occupying the property once they buy it. And the Supreme Court said, okay. And then that's what you have, right? Like, so you have people where you're able to buy property, you just can't occupy the property in order to keep the neighborhood white. Makes no sense, but hey, again, I'm not the law, I'm not the Supreme Court. And so if you look in a lot of the deeds, and probably if you live in the area, check out your deeds, see what restrictive covenants are in it. I've had a few people talk about the fact that they have, it's in their deeds. It's in did he say that? Yeah, see, JP, it's in JP's deed. It's in folks' deeds where you can literally go look at your deed to your property, and it'll show the restrictive covenants that apply to your property. And if you had racially restrictive ones, then, it's there. So that's important. And when we talk about, if you're in the San Gabriel Valley, we literally have a map that shows white individuals live around the outside of it. I'll show the map. They live around the outside of it. Asians live, between, and then in the center, you have Latinos. Okay. There are literally very little Black people in San Gabriel Valley. Altadena has more than 23% Black individuals. That's because they did not have racially restrictive covenants. Okay. But in most other cities throughout the region, you're talking about between 1% and 3%, actually. Some, like Pomona, gets up to 6%. But Black individuals do not live in the San Gabriel Valley, much of the reason because of what we're talking about. Redlining and reverse redlining. I talked about the development, right, where you would go out and get funding and you create a development, a neighborhood from empty land. Well, the FHA, the government program, is basically was a large funder of these large scale developments. And what they did was they had a policy called redlining, which meant if you created a housing development that allowed for the occupancy, or if it was going to be integrated and allow for minorities to live there, they wouldn't give funding. Okay, this is the federal government. Like, literally, the 13th Amendment was passed in Reconstruction. The federal government did this all the way up until really the 70s. They probably still do a lot of this. And it has a lot to do with the fact that no funding went out to any property that allowed for minority occupancy. And then there was what's called reverse redlining. Well, banks actually did the same thing. They wouldn't, the FHA wouldn't loan to developers, and banks wouldn't loan to individuals, minority individuals. And then they created this system of reverse redlining, where when they did open up and they did allow for minorities to live in particular areas, they would hunt out those minorities and then charge them higher interest and higher rates in order for their mortgages, for their insurance, all the expenses to live in that particular area. So if you were allowed to get any land as a minority, you had to pay a premium for the land as well as premium on the insurance, the interest, and the mortgage itself. And then we passed laws in 1975 and 77 to require more transparency, and it's supposed to put reinvestment in places that have been hurt by previous policies. We'll see how that goes. And then city planning. After racial covenants were no longer legal and redlining was banned, we got more creative. I didn't do it, they did. All right. And so if a developer came in and they said, here's our plan, we want to create a neighborhood here and it's going to be integrated, the city would either say no, they would either rezone it to an industrial place so that they couldn't actually put the thing there, or they would increase the lot size. They would increase the lot size, and because they increased the lot size, people couldn't afford it. Okay, so then they had to scrap the project altogether. I was wondering where those letters went. Sorry, I was typing this up with my baby boy, and he was typing on the computer. So that ignore the BGS. Okay. So they had fees and special engineering requirements that they would have to adhere to that would oftentimes make the project unfeasible or too expensive for them to carry through with them. So literally so much development was discouraged simply in the city planning process. So when we start to think about like our local governments, what does the planning commission do, right? The planning commission actually, when they look through these developments and they say, no, we're not going to pass this unless you make this modification, or they deny it altogether. The planning commission is the gatekeeper to city planning before it goes to the city council. Okay, so you have city planners who work with developers. They come up with this stuff and then they advise the planning commission. The planning commission comes up with the way to prevent it from happening, and then the city council stops it as well. And so locally, this is where we're seeing this happening. Obviously, the federal program that disallowed funding is a federal situation, but much of the land and much of the housing discrimination is literally occurring at the local level, right? From the county and the city level down. We see freeways literally planned to go through Black neighborhoods so that they were all like they were destroyed, taken down, and then those folks replaced. And I know many of us are thinking, well, they probably got their market value because that's the Constitution, right? Well, they didn't. Okay, so many of them did not get relocation costs, and that's why when you look at, well, there's actually a number of externalities that come from that. I'm not going to go on that diatribe. And then finally, suburbanization. It made little to no sense, especially in California, being as deserted as it was, to create the suburbs that we did, because we didn't necessarily have the irrigation and stuff for it. And then we did, and then we started having our droughts. But the suburbs is basically a way for white folks to get away from minorities and leave minorities in concentrated areas, urban areas, okay? And places were zoned and government housing was all located and put in concentrated areas in order to make neighborhoods look a particular way. And then the suburbs look a different way. San Gabriel Valley, notice how different San Gabriel Valley is from LA and the Inland Empire, okay? Like literally, the San Gabriel Valley is a suburb to both of these communities that was very, very, very aggressive in its races and its racial policy as it came to land availability to minorities, particularly Black individuals. And then block busting and white flight. Block busting is when, you know, a minority is going to move into a particular neighborhood, a real estate agent is going to go door to door and say, hey, you have a black moving in next door. They're probably going to drive down the prices of the house. You should go now. This house is worth 500,000. I can get rid of it for 450,000 tomorrow. Okay. They do it. They get out of there. And San Gabriel Valley, again, really good example. Monterey Park literally went from 99% white to now 3% white. And that is from 1970 to 2000. They went from 99% white to 3% white, with the Asian and Hispanic or Latino population making up that gap. Why does all of this matter? Well, this is interesting because when you say, well, why are Black people in the situation that they're in? Well, we're in this situation because we've been held back. But not only have we been held back, there's been policies put in place to help white people, white poor people, that discriminated against Black people. Okay, the Homestead Acts, there's been many of those. Those didn't stop until the 1970s. You had the New Deals, both of them, that went into working with the poor, helping poor get land, pay for their resources, etc. But it exempted agriculture and domestic workers, which were the two areas that were most populated by Black individuals. You had the GI Bill that was facilitated by the local government that had a lot of the Jim Crow tendencies. So you saw discrimination play out against Black servicemen. The housing and lending program, where literally home loans were given out for free. If you needed, if you qualified, and it didn't take much to qualify, you got them. Okay, so people had access to housing, people had access to funding, people had access to land, and they were able to get that land at a very cheap rate. And then you got fair lending practices, to help generationally white folks get property, keep property. And that matters because what we saw is home prices in the 50s, 60s. If you just jump on Zillow, put in the Laverne property and look at the value of that property. You're going to see it was worth 30,000 at some point, then 120,000, then 300,000, and all of a sudden it's a $600,000-$700,000 house. Well, that happened because of being able to keep various people out of the neighborhood by simply raising the prices. If you raise the price and these folks are dealing with disproportionately low incomes, then it makes it harder for people to be able to get the properties in the high income areas. And that's how, again, you cause racial division along income lines. And this is actually seen now that if you look on the map, cities with higher white populations have higher home values, higher high school graduation rates, higher college graduation rates, and higher economic activity and performance. Okay, and it's drastically different from the Latino populated areas that have lowest economic activity and performance, lowest home values, highest high school dropout rates, and the lowest college and high school completion. It's literally all matched along racial lines. So the result is you have I'm sorry. Separation basically is what maintains a white dominated society, right? You know how much exposure you've had, but really I want to hope that we understand the real implications of this. We've pegged property tax to school funding, okay? And what I've talked about is poor areas, either one, don't have access to home ownership, or two, they have lower valued properties. Okay, and what that means is there's less funds available for school. All right, and what that results in is dilapidated school structures. You have less support, you have less programs at poor inner city schools, and that helps feed and facilitate the school to prison pipeline, which again reverts back to everything that I talked about in the beginning, economics. Okay, we create a steady stream of labor through our penal labor system. And that's really the system of how housing works. But also think about some of the other benefits that you get, right? You have $600,000 equity in your home. You can send the kid to college for that, right? You can afford to pay for the dorms. You can afford to pay for the books. You can do a lot more for your kids than most minority students have when they go off to college. And then you die and you pass it on, right? And so that's why you have systems where the net worth of Black individuals, the average net worth is about $17,000 compared to 107 or 117,000 for white individuals. It's a stark difference, and it has a lot to do with how land is distributed and how funding works within our system. That being said, any questions or comments or anything? I know I that's a lot. I went through a lot. Are you guys still with me?
Michelle's comment, what can we do? Krista's comment, how do we fix it?
Sorry, I'm putting up. So, and actually, that's that. Quite honestly, that's the book. Well, that is why I really want us to get into that book, because it talks about a lot of the implications that these policies have caused. At the end of the day, this has a lot to do with health. I don't know if you guys know this, but the top 1% lives, or let's just say the top 1% lives 10 to 15 years longer than those in the lower class, right? So we're talking about health, we're talking about life, we're talking about the ability for people to be able to live successful lives that's being denied from them. And so the book Well talks about a compassionate society, how we take on policy from a compassionate lens, and it's going to require that. It's really going to require that. The anti-racist book, Kindy's book. I mean, I can't speak too much on it because I'm just now on chapter 2. But if you read chapter 1, you can start to say, oh, really? And one of the things that stuck out to me, he talks about racial discrimination. Racial discrimination in and of itself isn't bad. Okay, racial discrimination is bad when it's racist. Well, it's racist when you're creating less equity between two groups as opposed to creating more equity between two groups. You can discriminate based on race if you're bringing those two races closer together. But if you're bringing them further apart, then that's when your racial discrimination becomes racist as opposed to anti-racist. So that I think is a pretty good lens to see this through. But this is the diverse San Gabriel Valley site where I'm working to tell this story through a visual virtual experience. So much of what I talked about is here. It goes into a lot more detail. I didn't talk about the shift from an agricultural society to a bedroom society. Look at it. See, I spared all this. I could have talked to you guys for another 2 hours on this. Look at all this. Chinese removal, didn't even mention it. Japanese internment. I bet you didn't know that the Japanese were interned right here at the Santa Anita racetrack and the Fairplex. That's crazy. Didn't know that, the Fairplex. I knew the Santa Anita racetrack, right? So there's all of this. But if you come to this site, this kind of gives you the background, some of the history, and it shows you visually and with a lot of writing. We're working on that. What has happened over time to create the situation that we are in. This is the map I wanted you guys to see. Is it the map that's up?
Yes.
Okay, so this is San Gabriel Valley here, right? So it cuts off. Wait, this is, I think, La Cañada around here. Okay, and so right here you see the Latino population. All right, here you see kind of a mix, right, between shut up, sorry, I don't know if you guys can hear that horn. You hear that, it's bugging me. You can see that there's kind of a mix there, but then you see these Asian enclaves that have developed around here, right? And then you have the white community that is set up along here. And this is just very interesting because, like, you see the little white spot here. Covina, like in Covina, there were specific spots that were designated as Mexican only, and so they were concentrated into particular areas. And certain areas was able to be maintained as white. Right? You have Phillips Ranch there. This is mostly because of housing prices, right? And these folks being the last places to be open communities for minorities. So when you talk about having the police called, being considered suspicious, and all those microaggressions that keep people out of the city, you're seeing more of that in these areas in order to maintain their white status. So that is the beautiful place I call home, and it really is a fantastic region. Unfortunately, the racial history has it where there's no Black representation. As you see, you don't get to Black until you are up here, right? This is the only Black area all of this, and then the rest of it is right here in the LA area. And that again is because this is the area that once whites moved out, they opened up to Black individuals. LA has a very unique history as to how this ended up coming to look the way that it does, how this looks the way that it does, and how that looks. So this is all the history that we're showing people. But I honestly think that in order to really understand policy, you have to understand this. You have to understand the history. You have to understand some of the nuances and why they happen the way that they do, and why, quite honestly, representation is the way that it is. Why do we have Latino congresspeople, Asian congresspeople in particular areas? And it has a lot to do with who's located where on this map. As you guys are probably, we're going to talk more about gerrymandering in our next session, but this tells the story of land and property. All right, so that being said, why don't we, well, let me go through the action items. Okay, my wife is telling me don't do that, and she's the boss. So, all right, let's, why don't we have Michelle, if you're able and ready. We've kind of gone through quite a bit of material. I'm hoping we can do a breath exercise to kind of decompress and let go of some of that mala, and then we'll jump into our breakout rooms.
Hi, everyone. After I think we all got
Michelle, you're still.
Oh, you can hear me? Can you hear me now?
Oh, it's me that can't. Ha!
What?
Sorry, my volume was down again.
Okay. So you guys can
I'm
hear
gonna get this. I'm gonna get this Zoom thing figured out. I promise.
All right. My daughter's probably gonna be pounding on the door, but that's pandemic, right? So I think we should just everybody stand up. So if you're sitting down, go ahead and join me and stand up. And just roll your shoulders around and roll your head around. Side to side, your chin stays to your chest. And notice where your feet are on the ground. And go ahead and Some people call it the yogi cha-cha. You can move your knees and move your hips, kind of get all the mala out of your body. And then take your arms and again, bring them across your belly and your chest. And at first notice how your breath is moving and the quality of your breath. Your eyes can be closed or open. I always just close them right away. It helps me to tune in, but you don't have to do that. And take a moment and reflect on this last week. And some of you put in the chat what you did to give you prana. And then let's take a moment though and see what did we do in this past week, whether it was our awareness, our choices, maybe conversations that perhaps gave you some mala. And let this round of breathing be a symbol of you releasing that mala from your physical body. So release your arms down by your sides and we'll take 3 cleansing breaths. Take an inhale in through your nose, fill up. And an audible exhale out of your mouth. Like you're fogging up a mirror. 2 more, breathe in. Exhale all the mala out. 1 more, breathe in. And exhale out of your mouth. We're gonna do breath of joy. So now that we got the mala out of our body, let's bring some joy into our life, some prana into our life. And so you're gonna inhale 3 parts. So take your arms by your sides and we're gonna inhale 1/3 of the way up and pause. Inhale 2/3, pause. Inhale all the way, pause, and exhale out. It could be out of your mouth or nose. So again, inhale 1/3, inhale 2/3, inhale all the way, exhale out. So we're gonna do that 5 more times. Breathe in, pause, breathe in, pause, breathe in all the way, pause, exhale out. 4 more times. I lost count, but I think this is the last one. Breathe in. Breathe in more. Breathe in all the way. And exhale out. Wrap your arms across your belly and your chest 1 more time and notice the shift in your energy. Not good, bad, right, wrong, should, shouldn't. Simply observe the difference, the contrast. And gratitude is a huge part of my practice. And so right now, in the forefront of your mind, what are you grateful for? Who are you grateful for? Personally, I'm grateful for this community, for meeting with you all week in and week out. And I'm grateful for the leadership of Thomas and Brittany and Jason. And I'm grateful that there is hope for our future. When you're ready, you can release your arms and blink your eyes open and have a seat. Thanks, everyone.
I'm gonna have to call you at like 2 or 3 in the morning, like, Michelle, I need you, girl. So last week we were well, let me actually jump into the action items real quick. Here are the action items. One, we have a bill that we didn't even talk about the bills.
That's why it went so fast.
Huh?
I forgot.
Yeah. we have two bills that we want to talk about, and quite honestly, I would like it if you would take a look at them. I think they're both good bills. AB 1022 is about policing, and it basically requires it's a number of different things. Read it. If you like it, we're going to send out templates for you, but it basically requires for police to intervene when another officer is using excessive force. It it prevents retaliation against officers who report excessive force circumstances. It prevents hiring individuals with, I believe, three confirmed cases by other law enforcement agencies. So it's a good bill to support. I actually think it's really good. I'm proud to see it coming up in California. It's by Chris Holden's office. And then there is another bill, SB 899. And what that does is it permits churches and nonprofits to use property for housing, low-income housing, to make more housing available. And so if they have 10,000 square feet or higher of vacant space, then they can use that as low-income housing space to round out to folks. So take a look at that bill as well. We're going to have, the links to those bills are in the chat. We'll also send you the templates for them as well. If you could, please watch the health haves and the health have nots. I'm hoping to get you guys into this book well, because that's what I want to shape our discussion on. What do we do? I want to shape it around that discussion. So when we come back on our fourth time, we have a third session, and then we're going to have a fourth session. We're going to talk about the solutions, some of the potential solutions that we might be able to use. Based on where you are and well, consider how your place impacts your health and how other communities' place impacts their health. That was a very confusing way for my wife to write that. Basically, we're talking about your location, because one of the things in health and well that they talk about, I didn't talk too much about it, is your zip code is one of the largest indicators of your health. Okay, and that has a lot to do with where folks were forced to live. Okay, so where do you live, and what does that open you up to, and what do others where do others live, and what do they not have access to that might impact their health? I live in Laverne, and quite honestly, it is a beautiful city. So I have access to parks. Like, I mean, literally, I can walk that way 3 minutes and have a park. Walk that way 3 minutes and have a park. And that's not true for every place. So think about that. And then obviously we want to reinforce what we're learning from Michelle. So start your mornings with a breath of joy, evaluate every level of wellness, and do something to give you prana. Okay, any questions on the action items? Those, as always, are going to be posted. All right, we have about 30 minutes left for our breakout rooms. Last week, you were given the assignment of looking into racism in your community, in your city, and seeing about learning from folks, talking to folks. So that's what we're going to talk about. What did you find out about your city in regard to race? Or did you hear anything in the presentation? Maybe you live in San Gabriel Valley that pertains to your city that you weren't exactly aware of. And two, what have you been learning from people as you've been engaging in these conversations? Is Corinne on the call? No. I have seen her engaging in some conversations, and she's doing a fantastic job of asking questions. I'm seeing folks who were just straight up anti no, 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 saying, okay, you might be right. And it's all coming from her approach. And these are all my friends that don't even know who she is. So I wanted to give her that shout out. But I would like it if we can go ahead and jump in these breakout rooms and have this discussion. If your room feels led to have a different type of discussion or something else that is on your heart, feel free to engage in that discussion. This is where we come together and get to understand what each other are going through during this time and share our circumstances and our experiences. Any questions or anything? Okay, so, and don't leave, folks. This is when it gets good. I know you didn't sit through all that lecture,
You promised to
right?
make it
Sat through that
interesting.
lecture, and then you getting ready to go when it's about to get juicy. Y'all tripping. And in fact, I'm not going to even show you the baby pictures until after the breakout session. That's how I do it. That's how I do it. All right. So I'm holding Jason's baby pictures hostage. Yeah, you could tell him I did that. Check out my rooms here.
Are we going to be coming back from